Admiral A.K. Singh, in your view, you know the ground reality, you know the availability of funds, you know Air Force requirement for more Rafales, you know Army's requirement, you know the Navy's requirement. Can India afford a third aircraft carrier at this stage? Because also weigh in the fact that Navy says of the 20,000 crore that was spent on INS Vikrant, about 75% was plowed back in the economy to boost the economy within the country. So can we afford to do that? Do we need to do that? Or do we need to get a nuclear submarine or maybe longer range missiles?
Look, first of all, we require. I definitely don't deny that the Air Force and Army require what they require. They are also highly professional people, so I'm not going to comment on what they require. I can only say the Navy has to, within its resources, decide. First of all, we need those 26 fighters for this new aircraft carrier, Vikrant, and thereafter, if you can't afford 6 nuclear submarines, can you cut down to 3 or 4? And if you can't afford a 65,000-ton aircraft carrier, can you cut it down to a 50,000-ton aircraft carrier? And if you can't afford a catapult launch and recovery aircraft carrier, can you cut it down to Stobar, which is what Vikrant is? Instead of 40,000 tons, can you make it 50 or 55,000 tons? Well, moving to put a EMOL system, you have to pay another $2 billion more for it. So it depends. There's a choice which the professionals in naval headquarters will have to make. But they have to reduce their targets definitely as to what they need. Ideally,
Okay.
we definitely require a third aircraft carrier. Ideally, we require 6 nuclear attack submarines. Ideally, we require mine countermeasure vessels. Ideally, require drones for long-range drones for maritime reconnaissance. We require.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, a floating airbase is quick response in any area compared to fighter jets, even with mid-air refuelers, flying all the way from India's shores. An aircraft carrier, let's say in South China Sea, it sends across a very clear message for freedom of navigation patrol, an effective message. Isn't that far more effective than flying a shore-based aircraft with mid-air refuelers from India?
Certainly, the aircraft carriers are meant for power projection. They're meant to operate away from your own maritime borders to whatever is existing in the area of threat. However, having said that, the most important thing is that we need to be realistic in our threat assessment. These are all numbers that we're talking about. Do you think we have a threat from the east coast of Africa to perhaps Australia on the other side? If that be so, the list will be never ending. So therefore, I expect that the Air Force will review its own force levels relative to what the realistic threat is going to be in the future. And more importantly, induct into that the technology factor, which will then give you a combat potential, which 20 squadrons will be equivalent to 40 squadrons. And the same way the Navy has to get down to realistic figures, because what we are talking about, just like Admiral A.K. Singh said, that we need a host of equipment for the Navy. Is it practical? No. And if it's not practical, then we better get realistic and get down to a force level that has more combat potential at a lesser cost, and be prepared for a quick reaction if it's required to protect our maritime assets or even land assets.
Very pertinent point you make there, and Admiral A.K. Singh, let's be practical is what Air Marshal Ahluwalia says, very politely indicating that perhaps a third aircraft carrier may not be as practical as maybe more shore-based aircraft with mid-air refuelers, longer range missiles, nuclear submarines. Look for an option that fits our budget better.
Look, Gaurav, first of all, I agree with Air Marshal Ahluwalia that we've got to make a threat assessment, and I'm very sure the Air Headquarters and the Naval Headquarters have made their threat assessments. They have cut down, they have made a priority list. I'm very sure of that. But having said that, you know, navies and air forces don't come cheap. They are high-tech services, both of them, and they cost a lot of money. The nation will have to be willing to spend a little more than, they'll have to raise the defense budget by a little more than what they have right now. Australia, just look at Australia. 8 nuclear submarines, 9 frigates. He's going to spend over $100 billion US. So these things cost money. Now, if you want to keep a budget at whatever 2% of your GDP or 2.3%, including pensions, etc., I'm sorry, Marshal Ahluwalia and I can be discussing for the next 1 year. But if there's no money, if there's no increase in budget, then even this minimal requirement, minimal increase of 1 or 2 extra units here or there, I'm talking about the Navy, will not be possible. With the present budget, it will not be possible.